What if the financial crisis of 2008 had not happened? Have you ever wondered what the world might look like today if one of the most devastating economic disasters in modern history, the financial crisis of 2008, had never happened? Would we be living in a more prosperous, stable world, or would delaying that crisis have led to an even greater catastrophe down the road? Today, we'll explore this fascinating what-if scenario, unpacking its potential impact on the economy, housing markets, and even society itself. And most importantly, we'll ask for your opinion, because history's greatest lessons emerge when we think critically and imagine alternative paths. To understand this what-if scenario, let's first revisit the financial crisis itself. The 2008 financial crisis wasn't just an isolated event. It was a global economic disaster triggered by reckless decisions, systemic flaws, and moral blind spots. It began with the subprime mortgage crisis in the United States, where banks issued risky loans to homebuyers, many of whom could not actually afford them. When the bubble burst, millions of people lost their homes, savings, and jobs. Financial institutions like Lehman Brothers collapsed, governments launched massive bailouts, and public trust in major financial systems was severely shaken. It wasn't just about numbers or markets. It was about broken lives, disillusioned citizens, and the long-term impact on how people interact with their economies. So, what if this global disruption had never happened? Could smarter regulations or earlier interventions have spared millions from pain and uncertainty? Let's start reflecting on what could have been. If the 2008 financial crisis had been averted, it's tempting to picture a world where the global economy stayed on an upward trajectory. Imagine some of the possibilities. What if those massive job losses, widespread foreclosures, and deep recessions never occurred? Perhaps governments and economists had recognized the warning signs in time, intervening early to prevent the housing bubble from inflating to the point of no return. Stricter regulations could have stopped risky lending practices, forcing banks to act responsibly and avoid the systemic collapse that followed. In this alternate reality, the housing market might have stayed stable and millions of families could have avoided losing their homes. Without the economic turmoil, public trust in the financial system might have remained intact. Consumers could have continued spending confidently, businesses could have thrived, and global investor confidence might have soared to new heights. From a broader perspective, avoiding the crisis might have meant avoiding the accelerated surge of income inequality that followed the recession, or even allowing governments to fund programs to address social challenges instead of bailing out failing banks. History buffs, imagine how different life might feel today if there had been no economic scars from 2008. Could this alternate world have catalyzed a new era of growth, stability, and opportunity for everyone? Or does this vision overlook deeper issues ready to boil over? While it's enticing to dream of a better world without the 2008 crisis, we must consider another possibility. What if avoiding the financial meltdown didn't solve the underlying problems, but simply kicked the can down the road? Could delaying the reckoning have led to even greater disaster later? Without the wake-up call of 2008, governments, banks, and individuals might have missed critical lessons about reckless behavior in financial systems. The risky loans that triggered the crisis might have proliferated, and the housing bubble might have grown to an even greater scale. If this alternate timeline reached its breaking point, the result might have been catastrophic, an economic collapse dwarfing the impacts of 2008. Consider how governments responded to the real-world crisis. Stimulus packages, bailouts, and tighter regulations. Would those reforms ever have come into play if there had been no immediate catalyst like 2008? Or would complacency have allowed systemic flaws to grow deeper until a future crash became inevitable? A world without the financial crisis might have seemed prosperous on the surface, but beneath it, hidden risks and unchecked practices could have continued to fester. Could we have faced something far worse, a global crisis so severe that recovery would take even longer and hurt even more people? Let's tackle the big question. Was the financial crisis of 2008 avoidable, or was it bound to happen? Many argue that the conditions of the financial system at the time made the crisis an inevitability. Rampant risk-taking, inadequate regulations, and the greed of profits above stability created conditions ripe for collapse. From this perspective, the crisis wasn't just possible, it was unstoppable. Others, however, point to missed opportunities and examples of negligence that could have steered the world away from such a disaster. Could governments have established stricter oversight on subprime lending? Could banks have taken their social responsibilities more seriously, instead of chasing short-term gains? Could citizens themselves have pushed to hold these institutions accountable before it reached a breaking point? It's worth remembering that hindsight is always 20/20ths. Decisions are clearer after we've seen the consequences play out. Perhaps the financial crisis was both inevitable and avoidable, depending on how we frame the choices made or not made before the collapse. Whether the crisis was inevitable or avoidable, one thing is certain: its effects have shaped the world as we know it today. If history had unfolded differently and the crisis had never occurred, would the housing market be more affordable in the present? Would fewer families be saddled with crushing debt, creating more opportunities for upward mobility? On a larger scale, avoiding the crisis might also have changed geopolitical dynamics and the balance of economic growth between developed and emerging markets. Without the financial shockwaves, countries like China and India might have played even stronger roles in shaping the global economy. There's also the question of public trust. Today, many people still view financial systems with skepticism, a legacy of 2008. If the crisis hadn't shaken our trust, might we be living in a world where people feel more optimistic about investing in their futures? Alternatively, if we accept that avoiding the crisis might have delayed it or made it worse, how much greater could today's inequality or instability be? Could financial ignorance have grown unchecked, leaving average people even more vulnerable to future shocks? As we close this exploration, we leave the floor to you. What do you think would have happened if the financial crisis of 2008 had never occurred? Would we be living in a better world today, or did this crisis force necessary reforms and provide valuable lessons? History buffs like you are no strangers to imagining alternate timelines, and your perspective on this what-if scenario could spark some fascinating discussions. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your take on this alternate reality, and what lessons from 2008 resonate the most today. If you enjoyed delving into this thought experiment and exploring history's pivotal what-if moments, don't forget to like this video, share it with fellow history enthusiasts, and subscribe to our channel. There's much more to uncover from history's most compelling twists and turns. Together, let's keep the discussion alive.